Hi, Peter is a key part of the whole thing as well. I decided to talk about the early history of the laser guide stars for Keck because that's where I probably had the most unique contributions, but the rest of it is in Peter's hands just as much and more than in mine. So this is sort of a personal history of, or prehistory of laser guide stars at Keck, and by prehistory, it means that I'm going to look back on the very original suggestion and development for the kind of laser guide stars that we use, which are these yellow lasers that excite sodium in the upper atmosphere. This all began in 1982. That's the prehistory part. As a Jason summer study, Jason is a consulting group, and the year before I was asked to join, there was a discussion of laser guide stars for a different application. And then moving on to a demonstration that we did at Livermore to show that you could measure the wavefronts from this yellow laser. At Lick Observatory, we built the first general purpose laser guide stereo system using these yellow lasers. And then, of course, at Keck. And I want to emphasize the early days at Keck because that's where I contributed most closely. There have been big advances since I was deeply involved, and Peter has told you about some of them, and I'm sure you'll hear about more as time goes on. Just for a quick reminder, in adaptive optics, you want to measure the details of the atmospheric turbulence using light from a star on a fast detector, and then a computer sends signals to a deformable mirror that changes its shape hundreds or thousands of times a second and corrects the light both from your guide star and your galaxy or whatever you want to look at. But the problem is that the laser guide star has to sample the same turbulence as the light from your galaxy or whatever other object you're looking at. And if they're too far apart, you're just looking through the wrong turbulence and you don't get enough information to do this correction. And so the point of doing a laser guide star is you could just point it straight at your favorite object, in this case a galaxy, and measure the turbulence in exactly the same direction. And we first did this at Lick and then at Keck, and it's now being done on all general purpose 8 to 10 meter telescopes. I'm revealing my bias. It's crucial for extragalactic astrophysics because there aren't enough bright stars, but it's a general statement. There are not enough bright stars. If that's all you remember from this talk, that's what you should remember. So this technology had its beginnings in the Department of Defense. In the Star Wars era, there are probably only a few people in this room that remember that, but various people wanted to do various things where high-power lasers shooting them into space. And in 1981, Julius Feinlieb suggested that you could use Rayleigh scattering from molecules in the lower atmosphere, say up to 15 kilometers altitude, to create an artificial beacon, which then you could measure using a wavefront sensor. The concept was reviewed in 1982 by this Jason consulting group that I'll tell you about in a minute, at the request of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration. And in that summer, Will Happer, who's an atomic physicist who knows very much about the transitions of sodium, and Gordon MacDonald, who was an atmospheric scientist who knew that there was a layer of sodium atoms at 100 kilometers in the atmosphere, suggested that instead of using Rayleigh scattering, that you could use a laser that was tuned to 589 nanometers, which is the sodium D2 resonant line, and resonantly excite sodium at a much higher altitude than you could do with the green laser for Rayleigh scattering. And the advantage of that is it's more like a star-star if it's 100 kilometers, whereas 15 kilometers you have to deal with what's called the cone effect, because it's really at 15 kilometers radiating a spherical wave rather than a plane wave, and you have to go through a lot in order to correct for that. So DARPA, for which the Jasons were consulting, immediately said, this is a great idea. let's do both at the same time. So they funded a Rayleigh scattering experiment at the Air Force site in Kirtland Air Force Base, which Bob Fugate ran, and a sodium concept that Lincoln Labs ran from Hawaii. This one did closed loop adaptive optics. This one didn't. It was sort of single shot. And the reason is because they didn't have a sodium guide star laser, a yellow laser that was continuous enough to keep measuring and correcting and measuring and correcting. Summer of 1983 was my first summer as part of this consulting group. I was the first woman. I was in my 30s. I was scared to death about all these famous physicists and Nobel Prize winners and what were they going to think of me. But I was asked to join in this project in the second year. And that's when I started exploring the application to astronomy, and I'll say a little bit more about that. It remained highly classified because of its origins with Star Wars until 1991. During that whole period, I kept waiting for somebody else to discover this great sodium laser guide star for astronomy, and a few French people did, but not enough to actually implement it. Yeah, I think I'll just go on. So this was, just for reference, this was the Rayleigh guide star beacon that Bob Fugate did in the Air Force, for the Air Force. That's a Starfire optical range in New Mexico, pretty spectacular. And this is a 1-meter telescope. So the problem with these green Rayleigh guide star lasers is if you want to do a 10-meter telescope, you need many, many of these beacons. And even with a lot of them, the correction isn't as good. So as I was saying, in 1991, a bunch of us had prevailed on the Department of Defense to declassify this whole idea. And this push was coming from two sides. One of it from the Jason side, where I wrote letters to the Air Force saying, you got to declassify this, and all the Jasons signed on. That was cool. And then Bob Fugate in the Air Force, the inside job, was also pushing to get this declassified. He was an amateur astronomer from when he was a teenager. And he just loved the idea of actually using this. I forgot to say, let me go back 1, 2. The application that Star Wars was interested in was firing your laser guide star at a low Earth orbit satellite. So you could do whatever you wanted to do to that satellite or missile or whatever. And that means that it moves across the sky very, very fast. And so you have to always be pointing ahead of where you think the satellite is going to be, because by the time you do the measurement and fire your laser, if you don't point ahead, the satellite will be someplace else. And so I and my little 30-something-year-old mind kept thinking, well, stars don't really move very fast. It's got to be much easier for astronomy. So what I didn't take into account was the 10-meter telescope aspect, but I just like the idea that it is an easier application. So Charlie Towns organized this session. This is Primmerman from Lincoln Lab and Fugate from the Air Force finally showing their results. I was sitting next to someone in the audience who had spent the last 5 years trying to do a Rayleigh guide star astronomy experiment. And he was almost in tears. He said, I've wasted the last 5 years of my life. These guys in the Air Force have done it all, and they did it much better. They had much more money than I did, and he didn't work on it after that. It was heart-rending. Problems with the classification system, not good. So the physics of sodium laser guide stars, as I said, there's a layer of atmospheric sodium up at about 90 kilometers. It's about 10 kilometers thick. And you shine your laser light to excite sodium atoms into a resonance transition. And when they drop back, they emit this yellow light. They emitted it into 4 pi, but fortunately, part of 4 pi comes back into your telescope, and you can measure the wavefront. So why was this hard? Well, there was no laser at this wavefront. And furthermore, as time went on, lasers were not particularly inclined to laze at 589 nanometers. there's no off-the-shelf, much less something that's ready to use when it's delivered. So in the early 1990s, shortly after this AAS session, I started this initiative at Lawrence Livermore, where I worked, to do astronomical laser guide stars, the sodium laser guide stars. So as I said, there was this JASON report. A few European papers started to be published in the mid-1980s, rediscovering the whole thing, not actually producing a closed-loop AO system, but showing that you could make a spot up in the sodium layer that you could then measure. And after it was declassified, I was eating lunch with a colleague, Herb Friedman, who's a laser engineer, right here in the outside deck of the cafeteria at Lawrence Livermore. We're having a nice lunch. It was sunny. And we looked at each other. We both knew of this in various ways. And we were amazed that nobody has actually picked up on this in astronomy. How can this be? And so we decided right then and there that if nobody else was going to build this sodium laser, we would. And we had no idea what we were saying. But Herb did. He was a laser engineer, but I didn't. But it seemed like an important thing to do, and it was hard. And Lawrence Livermore is really good at doing big, hard projects. They have a lot of excellent laser engineers, a lot of excellent electronics engineers. And we thought we could probably get their help in doing this. At the same time, we published a now unclassified paper. It took a couple of years to get through the JOSA review process, Atmospheric Turbulence Compensation by Resonant Optical Backscattering from the Sodium Layer in the Upper Atmosphere. That's the longest title I've ever had of a paper. And I wrote this based on all the work that had been done over the previous years by this group of people. In the astronomy section, I specifically described putting a sodium laser guide star on the 10-meter telescope, which did not exist, and it wasn't even a project yet, and I decided. But it was in the air. Jerry Nelson was around, Terry Mass was around, people were talking about it, and I decided if this is going to be the premier telescope for UC, we should do it for that. So, how do you make this yellow laser if everybody else has failed at it? And there were sort of several stages in order of use at Keck. A big hunking dye laser pumped by green lasers, first at Livermore copper vapor lasers and then double Diag lasers. A solid state some frequency laser, which was built by Lockheed Martin Coherent Technologies, and which is until very recently was still on Keck 1. And finally, a type of laser, phooey. Now I understand why everybody has trouble with this. Which is now a commercial toptical laser where they've done all the laser engineering that's so hard for us academics to actually get right. So the first dye lasers had a great big room, or in the first case, building full of copper vapor lasers at Livermore, and then frequency double YAG lasers at Lick and Keck. They pumped a dye master oscillator, which, when tickled by sodium light, emitted this 589 nanometer, light that we want, and then a dye amplifier. And this dye amplifier was actually up on the telescope, and the master oscillator and all this stuff was on the dome floor. And we're transporting up to the telescope through pipes, basically flexible pipes, large amounts of dye, which made a hell of a noise because the pumps were going, yeah, 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 yeah. And it was somewhat of a fire hazard and very, very inconvenient. It was a bear of a thing to operate. It was the only show in town. Nobody else, until ESO came along with a smaller version that didn't work so well, this was the only way to do it. It's a hard wavelength to pull off. And so we all grit our teeth and lived with it and slowly improved it and made it more operable. I actually submitted a big proof of concept proposal to Lawrence Livermore's internal research and development program. And I remember walking down the street on a beautiful day at Livermore toward the in-person review where I had to stand up and convince all these important people that they should give me a couple $1 million, which at the time seemed incredibly expensive. And I really thought I was crazy because I was going to claim that LaserGuys.io could make ground-based telescopes see as clearly as if they were in space. And I remember walking down this road saying, Claire, what are you doing? You're 30-something years old. You're going to tell these people that you're going to make ground-based lasers see as clearly as if they were in space. And amazingly, Livermore was willing to take a chance on this crazy idea. It built on a strength, namely lasers, and they had always had some astrophysics interest. And the incredible thing was we did it. And it took a long time to really get it working well, but I am amazingly fortunate to have participated in this effort with Kakin, with Peter, and everybody else who stuck with us for the long term until we got it going well. And in particular, Peter here, Jerry Nelson, was a supporter and cheerleader and leader of the Center for Adaptive Optics with me. And Ed Stone from Caltech and the Keck Foundation, his association with the Keck Foundation. The Keck 2 telescope, as I've been told, somebody can tell me if this is really right, had come in for less cost than they had originally thought, $7 million less than the budget. And yeah, it's amazing. That never happens anymore. Thanks to Jerry Smith, the project manager. And Ed pushed back on the natural inclination for people to suck up the money elsewhere and say, oh, we need this for this and this and this. And he said, let's use it for adaptive optics. And that's how Peter and I got going. It was because of Ed digging in his heels and saying, no, you can't have that money. All right. Okay, so thank you. Thank you to Ed, too. So this first experiment that we did at Lawrence Livermore was pretty zany. There was a building over here full of copper vapor lasers, literally full of copper vapor lasers, that were that fed a dye laser, pumped a dye laser, for use in separating isotopes of uranium for civilian nuclear power. You may have read the papers recently that we buy all of our enriched uranium from Russia still, and that's a problem. People back then thought, well, we should be making our own isotope separation, and Oak Ridge isotope separation plant was very long in the teeth even then, and it's longer in the teeth now. And so there was this idea that you could tune a dye laser to the relevant frequencies of uranium atoms and somehow separate U-235 from the other isotopes. And that did work in the lab. In order to get from this laser room to a lab over here where the isotope separation was going to happen, there was a set of underground pipes, big pipes, and the laser light went through those pipes. And so my colleague Herb Friedman said, look, I happen to know that there's a place over here, in this case right there, where it takes a jog, the pipe takes a jog, there's a turning mirror, and heads the light off to the lab, the uranium lab. Let's just put a turning mirror here pointing up instead of sideways. And that's what we did. And so we had a little 1-meter telescope with a wavefront sensor that we used to measure the wavefront. Here's the launch telescope built by Melsheimer, and we got to know him really well. And here, just a few of my colleagues, but it took a lot of people to make this happen, and it was so much fun. Yes? Does that mean that you had to dig a hole down to get to the pipe? No, there was it was sort of like a junction box, and there was like a manhole cover kind of thing sticking up. Not quite, but. So the other amazing thing is that it takes a lot of energy to separate isotopes of uranium, and so this was a kilowatt laser. So our lasers, just for reference, are 10 to 20 watts that we use for astronomy on a good day. So this was a honking laser, and I wasn't sure if we were going to be allowed to do that. What if we killed a bird? What if we illuminated an airplane? So Lawrence Livermore was incredibly helpful. They had a PR group that took me aside, and they gave me a lesson called How to Meet the Media and Survive, literally. So they wanted me, before every night that they shined this laser, to publicize on the local TV and in the newspaper and so forth, so people wouldn't panic and feel like something weird is happening. People did panic. There was a lady who lived in Pleasanton, which is about 10 miles away, who would call the CHP every time we propagated the laser, and it's California Highway Patrol, and say, there is a UFO hovering above Lawrence Livermore, sucking up its secrets using this laser. And she called every time, and so sometimes we had a CHP guy standing with us just to monitor what we were doing, and I remember him saying, oh no, it's that lady again. Okay, so those are the stories. I will put out little stereo images of what this looked like. You could see the laser from the mountains all ringing the valley, and it was kind of amazing. So the first thing we did after that was put this dye laser at the Lick telescope, and that was a joint project of Livermore and UC. And we used the adaptive optics system to do science, and the dye laser then was proven, and we said, okay, well, let's try and build one for Keck. So we did, and the laser that we delivered to IMEA, big dye laser, was not summit ready. It was more like a lab demo than a facility level instrument. That was a real education for me and for many of the people that I was working with. So eventually we put a new team of people in place, these folks who knew how to make lasers work reliably, and they did a lot of laser engineering to harden the system. People at Keck were very patient, even though they griped about us all the time, but that was justifiable. And we began installation at the summit in 2001, and Peter did all the key AO system modifications to go to Laser Guide Star AO, and the first light was in 2004. I'm going to skip this because I'm running out of time. So here's a picture of the first launch telescope, which was on the side of Keck 2, and now the lasers are launched from the middle, which works better. Yeah, so Keck has really led the way. We were the first 8 to 10 meter telescope to do this, and I think we've really been pioneers in this. This was the Summit group, somewhat younger now at first light. I didn't react too well to the champagne, but never mind. And it made a difference. So this is one of the galactic center fields. Sagittarius star is here. This is with the Laser Guide Star, and this is with a natural star. So big difference. 2 further generations of lasers have been built at Keck. The next one was the Lockheed Martin Coherent Technology laser on Keck 1. And then the big advance was these commercial fiber lasers that now everybody is using who has an 8 to 10 meter telescope, built by Toptica and a Canadian company. And very soon, that was first on Keck 1, and now it's going to be, or / is on Keck 2. 2 years ago, okay, very good. Thank you. So I just want to emphasize, I skipped over the slide that showed the monster that the dye laser was, but the whole The whole fiber laser is in this little box. This is the electronics and power supplies and so forth. And fibers, this is the master oscillator is in here. Is that right? And then they're just little fibers that lead up to here. And I love this, even though it's only showing 3 lasers on the Summit of Mauna Kea, and now there are more. I just like this because all these big telescopes now have sodium guide star lasers. So this is Peter's slide showing the number of laser guide star AO papers per year. And we have made the biggest contribution cumulatively, but ESO now has a couple of fantastic facilities, and we got to stay sharp in this in order to stay ahead. And Peter showed you this already as well. Number of refereed science papers using any kind of AO versus year for Keck. And here's extragalactic, galactic, exoplanet work and solar system work. And I think the most interesting part of this is each one of these wedges is growing. So we're still learning how to use adaptive optics better and better. About 450 of these are using laser guide star AO, the rest are natural guide star, but I like the fact that there's this nice learning curve. So thank you, WMKO, for being patient and giving us the time to develop this hard but dramatically better technology, and thank you, Peter, for a long and very fruitful collaboration.